Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Hartglass, and you are listening to It's All About Food. Thank you for joining me today. I think we're going to touch on a subject that we have never covered before on this podcast, and I've been talking about food and drinks for over 17 years, since 2009, almost weekly. And it's fascinating to me that there is this broad complicated subject to cover that involves what we eat and drink. And it's pretty much covered to a very tremendously, I'm searching for words here. There's like everything in this book that we know to this day in 2026 involving our taste. And this book is Your Tasting Brain, A Sensory Approach to Wine, Beer, and Other Pleasures by Randy Mosher, who is a food writer and creative consultant who teaches at the Siebel Institute of Technology Brewing School. He is the author of 5 books, including Tasting Beer and Insider's Guide to the World's Greatest Drink. He is currently a minority partner in 2 Chicago area breweries. Thank you for joining me today, Randy.
Thank you, Karen, for having me. It's always a pleasure. I think it just shows how little we are brought up to think about tasting. We talk about food endlessly, but really it, smell, mouthfeel, taste, unless you're trained to do it, unless you're like a beer judge or a sommelier or something like that, for most of us, it's just kind of like out there, but we don't really get into it that much.
No, and we're going to get into it a little bit in this next hour, and your book gets into it a lot. I have some observations about your book, and they're all positive, even though they may not seem that way. You describe this book as a monster,
Yes.
and I have a background in chemical engineering. I have a master's in chemical engineering. I'm not afraid to read about chemistry. But when I started reading the book, my first reaction was, okay, you're not going to be tested on this subject.
Right.
There's so much in here, so
Yeah.
many acronyms, vocabulary, things I had never seen or remembered. And I didn't want that to overwhelm me, although I was often overwhelmed and I would have to put it down and pick it up again. But I felt through the entire book that the information was so important that I wanted to get through it. And I've noted that I was reading some reviews or commentaries on your book, and it was noted that it wasn't quite a textbook and it's not quite layman user friendly. It's kind of a combination in between. Was that intentional? Or do
We
you
had a
even
lot of
realize that that is what happened?
Oh, we had a lot of discussions about it because this was a University of Chicago press. It's an academic press, more or less,
Yeah,
and they
right.
publish what are called trade books, which are like books. But we had I way overwrote the manuscript, and they gave me the option. Well, I didn't know what I could do I didn't know what I couldn't do without until I put it down on the page because this subject, I mean, I am an artist by training and trade, and I've
Hmm.
been spent my career as a creative person doing design work and design for beer labels. It turned out to be a specialty for me, but I spent years in advertising agencies. I learned to write there as a creative director, and so I'm coming at it from a completely art background. But that's what drew me to beer and draws so many people into brewing because beer is one of those things that it's art, but it needs science, or else you can't do it. And cooking is the same way, but beer is more technical in a way. Like you can go start cooking, but it's hard to start brewing unless you have a book to tell you how. You have to understand kind of the processes and stuff. And so for me, I'm like the artist who wanted to play mad scientist and learn chemistry and eventually that led me to all of this sensory stuff that I've got involved with over the last 6 or 7 years. But I see also people coming to beer through engineering, but they want to be creative, right? So it's a two halves of the brain type of pursuit. And I think that's got to be true for cooking. It's got to be true for the wine production of, creation of wine and all of that.
Well, I think that's probably what appealed to me because I'm definitely involved in the arts and I'm definitely involved in science. And this was a beautiful, harmonious merge of the two, but difficult to read.
It is. Well, I tried to make it, I mean, I didn't want to dumb it down.
Yeah, I
And
appreciate that.
one thing that kept me going for 6 years in my little dungeon here is just every day, every week, I would have some read some paper that was like, I never knew that before. That informs what I'm doing. I think that will be important for other people too. So it's worth, and I tell people, start anywhere. If you get bogged down, with understanding the way receptors work, just like go to something else and read that for a while, and then
Hmm.
come back. And it's like I said, it's like reading a Shakespeare play. When you when you when you first start, you don't know where you are. They're talking really weird. You don't know who the characters are. You don't really know what's going on. And by the end of the first act, you kind of like your brain just sort of rotates and clicks in place. And so that was sort of that's how I tell people to just give it some time, and the things do make sense. But we are very complicated.
We are very complicated indeed. And we're going to touch on some of that. And what blows me away is all the things that are happening just from a sniff. And
Hmm.
yet the rest of our body is doing so many other millions of complicated activities.
Right, all at the same time. I mean, it's just absolutely miraculous. I mean,
Miraculous.
I'm not a spiritual person, but man, the things we can do, the things that have evolved to the precision and the complexity and just so much. It's just really awe-inspiring.
We have a lot more to learn.
We do, and we still do. But science
Yes.
has been moving really rapidly, so that's one of the reasons why this is a good time for this book because
Okay.
they
No,
did.
no. Yeah. Knowing nothing about smell and taste, really. I've often heard the expression that taste is 90% smell, taste is 80% smell. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, first of all, we struggle with the word like taste versus tasting. And we even had problems with in editorial. My editor didn't quite understand how the English language just does not have the right word. So we use tasting. Taste is about what's on the tongue, happening on the tongue and in your mouth. And sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, and maybe fat, and maybe a couple others. But it's very limited set. It has very specific things. So you can only get so much information out of your food from those five things. It's very, very limited. It's really important and super, it's a super important part of cooking and ingredients and everything. But
Hmm.
we can smell so many things they don't really even know how to calculate how many, right? It's trillions or billions or jillions or whatever you want to say. Every smell that will ever be created, we can still smell. We because the way our sensory system works, we have a huge big chunk of our genome. We have 400 almost olfactory receptors, and they create patterns that the brain can recognize, and that just gives us immense potency. So yes, tasting is probably 90% smell, more maybe more than that, because that's where the good stuff is. That's where the bad stuff is. If there's problems, you're gonna smell them.
It's interesting because I took some notes and you like touched on like a bunch of things I wanted to bring up all at once. So A plus. uh, so you have some nice sections with some fun titles, and Meet the Tastes is one of them. I think it would be a great name for like a Netflix series on a family, the Taste family.
The taste family, yeah,
Meet the Tastes.
yeah.
But sweet, salty, bitter, sour, umami. You said them really fast before. I wanted to say it a little more slowly. And you talk about how sweet and maybe salty are easier to quantify, but bitter is a really complicated thing to explain, test. Sour isn't so bad, it's acidity. And then there's the mysterious umami.
Yeah. Umami, some scientists even argue umami is not a basic taste like the other tastes because umami, to really get umami flavor, it depends on having some harmonious aroma with it, right? It depends on having some like celery or vegetable aroma with it or a meaty aroma, some other thing like that. And then you get full. blossoming of umami. But if you put it, there's an experiment where they put it together with a rum flavor, and it just to see what happens. Like, so let's put it together with something really incoherent, and it was like not really even there, but what was there was really unpleasant for people. So it's what they call a multimodal sensation, right? It's flavor, not taste, right? So flavor is taste plus, taste plus smell, taste plus mouthfeel, taste plus sometimes how much you pay for the bottle of wine comes into play on flavor.
I didn't think about this until just now, but earlier in my life, I used to paint and I took painting classes. And one of my earliest memories was doing this classic painting experiment
Hmm.
where you take a color and you paint it on a page and you cut it into little squares. And then you put it on the background of other colors.
Oh
And
yeah,
you see how that color looks different when the
the
background
contrast.
changes.
Yes.
And this is kind of a similar concept, only with smell, where if you're changing what you're adding to what you're tasting, I'm
Hmm.
being careful with the word taste or tasting,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
but it can change.
Totally. It totally can change. See, the one of the really big insights, and it's sort of obvious if you think about it, but what's going on in terms of the neuroscience is that each sense has a little landing spot in the brain where the signals go in and they start there. But as soon as they get through those early processing areas, it all flows together. So taste, mouthfeel, smell, they all combine really early in the brain. So what we experience is not necessarily taste, smell, and mouthfeel separately. As a taster, you actually have to kind of train yourself to focus on one aspect. It's something that takes some time to learn how to do. Like in wine, it's really important to tell the difference between sweetness and fruitiness, right? Because fruitiness is a smell, acidity, or I'm sorry, sweetness is a basic taste. Same with acidity. How acidic is this wine? Well, you got maybe some sweetness in there. You've got sweet aromatics. You've got all kind of stuff. But wine people, if you're doing your blind tasting training, you want to know how much acidity is in there. So they have to really focus on like how long it remains in the mouth and what the character is. And there's a whole bunch of things that the SOM training trains those people to do. So it's just one of those things where your brain is trying to be really helpful, and it is helpful in day-to-day situations. But as tasters, we're kind of trying to do something a little unnatural that the brain, we're trying to extract the information, right? We're not just trying to make a decision, should I put this in my mouth or not? Should I pick this apple off the tree? Whatever it is. But we're trying to actually turn sensations into information, and it's just a different kind of task.
Okay, you mentioned mouth feelings, and I just wanted to list them. You have some nice tables that refer to
Yeah.
mouth feelings: texture, heat, cold, irritation, numbing, tingling.
Yes.
Now, I know with friends that I have that texture plays a huge part in what they want to consume. I
It's
have a friend who,
enormous.
I mean, tomatoes. People just won't eat them because of their texture when raw.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know people like that.
That slimy texture is so offensive, and so many different things. Like my partner doesn't like mushrooms. He doesn't mind the taste, the flavor. I don't even know what the right word is I'm supposed to use,
Yeah.
but it's the texture. What is
Yeah. Well,
that?
I used to work with a woman who didn't like onions because they screeched when she ate them. Like
Screeched.
they squeaked, they had a texture. I don't know what that is. I mean, I didn't find any science on. I think a lot of these are just early childhood experiences that we have and they linger on. I didn't find a ton of papers on really on development of mouthfeel and how people develop preferences. But if you look at like country, like region by region, the Asians have a craving for all of those sort of gelatinous textures like chicken
Mm.
feet and jellyfish. And I mean, there's so many things in Asian cuisine that in Western cuisine, most people will be like, oh, that's kind of weird. But for them, that's like a beef tendon in soup, right? Most Westerners would think that's pretty peculiar, but they love those things. But that's part of their culture, and they've grown up with it. And so and it's connected to feeling nurtured and well fed and cared for and comforted by a warm dish of soup or something. So it all, we live ourselves with all of these memories, and they can be very persistent and hard to change for people.
Is it the same with the other mouth feelings like heat and cold food and hot food with different cultures?
Well, yes, and heat and cold. The really weird thing is, not only can they be stimulated by actual like thermal heat, they can be the exact same nerves can create the exact same impressions just with chemicals like the
Mm.
capsicum that's in chili and menthol that's in a stick of gum, right? Or a peppermint stick. Those and no one really knows why. It's just that those chemicals have a configuration that are somehow able to latch onto those receptors and stimulate the same thing. So it's kind of a really spooky thing.
Yeah, we're spooky.
We are. But texture is hugely important. It's kind of hard to talk about. Like in wine, they talk about body, right? And everybody
Hmm.
has a kind of a general sense about what body in a wine feels like, but they can't really define it. Like that's one of those terms in wine that everybody talks about, but they don't really know. Is it alcohol? Maybe a little. Is it glycerin? Probably not. Is it, it's no protein in wine. Like beer has a lot of protein in it, so protein in beer creates the body of beer, it gives you that really nice dense texture on the mouth. But wine doesn't have protein in it particularly, so
Mm.
it's a little bit of a mystery where that body's coming from. And of course, in wine you have tannins from both the grape skins in red wine and the wood that's often added. So that's also, that tannic texture is really obviously a very important element of wine and wine's balance and everything.
Okay. I I'm I'm very interested in these mouth feelings, so I kind of want to
Hmm.
go to each category.
Let's
And
go.
and so what we have is irritation.
Yeah.
What would we eat that would be irritating?
Hopefully nothing. Well, alcohol, right?
Okay.
Alcohol is irrit. So
Like a
almost
scotch could be irritating.
just the alcohol itself, the ethanol. So a really high proof ethanol or a poorly distilled spirit, say, it has not only ethanol, but it may have some other types of alcohols that are more pungent on the palate. Uh, the greatest example I can give of what irritation feels like is nail polish. All right, if you get out nail polish, or I built model airplanes as a kid, so I say airplane glue. But
Uh-huh.
in our house, nail polish is sometimes out, and it gets into your nose, and it gets into your eyes, and you have receptors in your nose and in the membranes of your eyes, and that's just like basically warning, dangerous chemical present. You might want to like stop. You might want to not breathe this in. And when you smell in chemicals like that, your sniff actually cuts short. Like it happens that fast that midway through a sniff, your brain can detect those kinds of things and tell your motor center to tell the muscles in your diaphragm and in your throat to like stop right now. And it's
That's funny.
basically self-protection.
Yeah, that's funny because when speaking about nail polish, I don't do my nails, but I like the smell of
Me either.
acetone. And I
It's
just
kind of
know
sweet, right?
I know it's not good for me, so I'm not going
Right.
to sit there with a bottle and sniff it. But it's like when I use it, it's like I like this.
Yeah.
But okay, close the cap. You're done.
Yeah. Well, one of the solvents in nail polish is actually a chemical that's an ester that's a fruity chemical that's produced by yeast and is present in fermentation. And then when a fermentation,
Mm.
say, runs away, if you have yeast that's not in good health or maybe super high alcohol, you can end up with a beer or a wine or something that has a lot of this like nail polish solventy kind of thing. And that's just from the yeast, but it happens to be a type of chemical that is also a really good solvent. So they use it, and
Hmm.
it's not as dangerous maybe as some other chemicals.
And what about numbing?
This is one of the more numbing and tingling are really interesting. So numbing, um, oregano and thyme have the chemicals that make those two things smell actually numb our palate. They give us
Oh.
like dull sensation, dull our ability to feel mouthfeel. They just like numb our tongue a little bit. And clove, think about clove. Clove used to be
Mm-hmm.
used in dentist office. I remember being when I was a little kid, you walk into the dentist office and it's just like clove everywhere because it was a effective thing. They would
Wow.
like daub that on a little piece of cotton and stick it down in a cavity or toothache or something, and people use that as pain control, and still do
And it's also
sometimes.
supposed to be like antibacterial or something to
I
help
think
with
so. Yeah,
dental problems. Yeah.
I think that's true. Also, yeah, a lot of those chemicals have lots of different properties, but the other one that I found really fascinating is this thing called electric sensation or tingling. It's present in really the main thing that you would see it in is Sichuan cuisine, Western
Mm.
Chinese food. It's a little kind of looks like a popped open black pepper, but it's sort of brick colored on the outside, and it comes from a tree called a prickly ash. And when it when there are receptors in your fingers and in your tongue that are sensitive to vibration and texture. It's how we can feel, rub it on a surface and you can feel the texture. These receptors that fire on and off and on and off and on and off. And they have a natural firing frequency of about 10 hertz. And normally there's a neurotransmitter that in normal state it suppresses them. But when you eat this Chinese cuisine with this prickly ash, this Sichuan peppercorn in it, it removes the suppression. So the cell just fires at its natural state and is like buzz. So it literally is a buzzing sensation. And it feels a little metallic. It's like this weird, it takes some time to get used to it. It's really kind of a peculiar characteristic. And it's also a little numbing. And in Chinese cuisine, it's always put together with hot chili. So the
Hmm.
sensation is ma la in Chinese. I think ma means heat and la means numbing. So that's a very desirable characteristic of like hot pot cuisines from Western China, where
Ah.
if you've ever had a hot pot and they're just like loaded up with chili and those Sichuan peppercorns, and you really get this buzzing heat and buzzing. It's quite a intense sensation. It's really cool.
The mouth is a fun place to be.
It is indeed.
Back to thyme and oregano, which you mentioned have a numbing quality. Does that affect food when I include thyme and oregano in my recipes? Is it masking flavor?
I
Because I
think
always
it's
thought spices and herbs enhanced.
I
Now
think
I'm
it's pretty
confused.
I think it's pretty subtle. I mean, I don't really know the exact point at which the numbing becomes present. I know that because I was at the dentist once and I don't use mouthwash at home. I don't, I brush my teeth and whatever, but I don't have a
Hmm.
need for mouthwash. And, they were rinsing my mouth out and they gave me mouthwash and it was like massive dose of oregano. It
Wow.
was carvacrol is the chemical. It was just like it was some commercial brand of mouthwash, and I just had this like intense sensation of Greek oregano. And I think they use that because it has a sort of kind of mouth numbing, maybe a little antibacterial, possibly, but it has some flavor, but it's not sweet. And I don't know exactly why they use it. The dental, like toothpaste and stuff, is a really, really interesting area where all the senses really come together, and the people that work on that are super interesting to talk to.
I'm going to jump around here. You said the people that work on that. So I'm wondering about the science related to tasting
Hmm.
and of course, all science or scientific studies require funding. So
Yes.
I'm going to assume that the people that get the most funding to do this kind of work have some sort of investment or capitalistic desire to make money on something from this knowledge. Is that true?
Well, I think there's a real clear separation between the people doing the academic work, which was mostly the papers and everything, the real science, because they're really interested in how the receptors function, how to understand, say, how proteins go from a string of genes and then get folded into a structure that's really like has certain utility and functions. So those are funded by maybe pharmaceutical companies, but probably as at least as often by governmental organizations or
Mm,
universities or things where it's really they're studying basic science. And then there is this enormous industry of flavor that is and fragrance, right? So you have companies like
yeah.
Procter and Gamble that have whole buildings full of people that just well, are working on toothpaste or they're working on the smell of household cleaners to make them smell fresh and effective and whatever. And so these are real, these are people that have studied for a very long period of time to understand the chemistry, like odors individually, but then how things work together and and understand how to put formulations together to create flavors and fragrances and things like that. And then and also so there's the fragrance world, which is mostly is there's a perfume thing, and then there's what they call functional fragrance, which is often the same kind of mixtures, but they're used to make like air fresheners and things.
Hmm.
And it, interesting thing that in the functional fragrance world, they'll often steal a formulation of a fragrance and turn it into something different as an air freshener. So there's a perfume called Opium that was very mysterious. They called it Oriental at the time, exotic sort of flavors with some floral aspects to it, and that got repurposed into uh, an Glade air freshener called English Country Garden. And because the verbal framing of it was like so specific, it worked for both things. So it's kind of interesting to see that the what happens at the perfumery, that's like the high fashion world, right? And
Right.
then you get down into the stuff you can buy at the grocery store that's like to make your bathroom smell better. That's often sort of based on variations of fragrances that come from the higher world. So there's this real it's a fascinating industry. It takes
It's
7 to 10 years to learn how to do that.
it's just making me think of Saturday Night Live scripts skits like it's a dessert topping, it's a floor wash, or it's a expensive perfume, it's an air freshener.
Yeah, exactly.
My concern with these fragrances and these flavors are how manipulating they can be and sometimes dangerous. So with the fragrances, I've read some of them are actually neurotoxins where they numb your brain somehow from maybe you could explain this to me where you're not able to smell the unpleasant smells because they're somehow masked by the fragrance.
Well, they are that is another whole area of chemicals that are either used to mask unpleasant odors or um, to kind of latch on to certain unpleasant odors. Like actually, that some of the molecules, like the spray, um, some of the spray things, they actually have a sugar molecule
Like
that is
Febreze.
like Febreze. As I understand it, they actually have these very complex sugar molecules that are kind of a cage, and the cages are chemically attractive to certain types of bad odors. They can design those cages to attract certain types of odors, which is why they have different ones for like pet odors or bathrooms or whatever. And
Mm.
they can change the size of them also. So there's little ones for certain odors, bigger ones for other odors. So the science of that is super fascinating. I'm in no way any kind of expert on it. One of the things that you read about in all the perfumery magazines and things is that um, more and more dangerous chemicals are being taken out of perfume. So
Mm.
there's some that are just dangerous, but those haven't been around for a long time. There are some that are people are allergic to, and those have pretty much been gone. And now they're taking out things that some people have sensitivities to. And so, and also you have a lot of like in the old world 100 years ago or more, all of the ingredients were sourced from natural products. And in some cases, the natural products were so desirable and so scarce that now the trees or the plants that they come from are endangered. And
Mm.
so not only is there not enough, but they have been like pushing these plants to the verge of extinction. And so a lot of what, and again, I'm not an expert on fragrance. This is just what I've read. You should get a perfumer on here and talk about
Yeah.
that, or a
Yeah.
or a flavorist. I've got a flavorist. That's a
Okay.
really fat. Those are great
Yeah.
people to talk to. But the trend is just to move away from more from these like hard to like endangered ingredients or ingredients that are people are sensitive to, and replace them with other chemicals. Like they can make the same molecules but get them from different sources sometimes, like vanilla. They can get vanilla from wood, right? Instead of having to get it from, or they can get vanillin, which is the main chemical in vanilla, but they can
Mm.
actually get it from certain types of wood
Mm.
and produce it the same chemical that comes from a different source, so they don't have to, source it from uh, orchids in Africa or Central America
Yeah.
or something. So there's a huge amount of change happening in those worlds.
And some of it is good.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a perfume consumer, but I do enjoy helping my wife pick out perfume once a year or so. I think it's really
Okay, that's
interesting, and
nice.
you learn to smell, and you learn to develop some vocabulary, and you can kind of smell anything. So
Yeah. The part that I'm more concerned with is the food scientists that are putting things into a lot of snack foods that make you want to eat more, and the foods aren't really healthy for us.
salt, fat, sugar. I mean, those are
Yeah.
the main ones, right? And
Yep.
um, yeah, we have a problem for sure.
We have a problem. Completely different. You talked about certain nutrients and a lack of them, like a zinc deficiency, can lead to a loss of smell.
Mhm.
And this woke me up a little bit because, especially after COVID, so many people have had experienced a loss of smell, some of it short term and some of it long term.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering where all of this connects.
Well, you basically have an extension of your brain called the olfactory bulb, and it's right up in the kind of up at the very top and behind your nose, and then coming attaching to that are these long threads that go down through little tiny holes in a bony plate in your skull, and then they make a kind of a mat in mucus on your um on the epithelium, the skin on the inside of your nose. It's sort of wet, moist in there, and they look just like little threads all over. And those are your olfactory cells, and studded on them are a bunch of receptors. And what happens is sinus infections of any kind will damage those receptors. And so they die out, and now you have to grow new ones. And so
Mm,
sometimes what happens is that they don't always grow back to the same places in the olfactory bulb that they were, right? So you'll have people that have a sense of smell, but now it's kind of weird, right? That you used to like chocolate, but now it really smells like dirt or something worse. Or, and so, but the good news is all of those receptors regrow themselves within about 2 weeks.
mm,
They're because they're one of the few parts of the nervous system that's actually exposed to the outside environment. They have to replace themselves every 2 weeks or so, or we just wouldn't have them. So it's not just about disease. It's just they're ongoing, they're getting replaced. But as long as they're attached to their correct things, they can be set up. The new ones can find their places. But when the cells die out, and that now the new cells are trying to grow, but they're like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go, and they
oh,
they get they get misconnected. And so you almost have to relearn. And so they recommend smelling like 5 different things, like mint and orange and like pine, and maybe like pick 5 really different things and smell those several times a day. And then as you go through, like you do a week of that, you find some different smells and smell those, and you can really retrain. And that's true for people that start to lose their sense of smell in old age too.
hmm,
I think there was just an article in the Washington Post about this. It was really covered that really well. And being able to smell, like losing that sense of smell, is a can be a symptom of Parkinson's. It can be a symptom of cognitive decline, but just losing your smell can cause cognitive decline. It's like losing your,
Mhm.
like when you lose your hearing, that's like one of the biggest red flags for the potential to cognitively decline because you're cutting off communication I don't like that gets into psychology that I don't that I'm not qualified to talk about, but it's significant. And so that's really there's it's the bad news, good news, but there you can recover from that in most cases from that loss.
Everything's connected. You
It
have
is.
a section called Know Your Nose. And in that, you talk about smell identity, which consists of recognition, memory, and hedonic recognition.
Hmm.
We just kind of touched on that a little bit in terms of, I think, the hedonic recognition. You said there were studies with very young people and old people. The young people don't have many hedonic experiences to connect with their smell, and the elderly are losing them, and that affects their smell identity.
Right. So we're born with a kind of a mild hardwired preference. Generally, fruity is good. Um, Rotting things is bad. I mean, that all makes sense. And there's other things on a continuum. And so we're born with the kind of a like a starter set of preferences. But as you develop, as you grow, as you have experiences, as you eat the cuisine that is in your house and in your culture, you develop your own preferences. And those are not physiological, those are cognitive, right? So those live up here. Those are learnable. And
Hmm.
you can learn them, you can unlearn them, you can overcome unpleasant ones. And this is true even for taste, where we have maybe more hardwired preferences, more robustly hardwired. But in smell, it's all kind of up for grabs. Once you started life and got past the age of 3 or 4, you're off and going, and you got your own set. And that starts in the womb. What your mother, there's a picture in the book you probably saw the
Yes,
of the feed.
it's in my
So
notes.
the
Hmm.
feed, yeah. So this feed, it was just like one of those moments, because it's so human. And this little like I don't know 7-month-old fetus in the womb has the resting face that's just, and then the face where his mom is just eating carrots and the baby is just like grinning ear to ear, it's just like that's a happy baby. And then the mom eats some kale and it's just it's like,
Frown.
and they point
Not
out
happy.
the scientists pointed out all the muscles and stuff, but it's just like, oh man, I hate this. And that's, at not even born yet.
Okay, so that brings up two things I want to talk about. One is the plasticity of our tasting, where we change over time for different
Mhm.
reasons. And then I know for myself, I have pursued a very healthy diet and lifestyle. And I have taught myself to like the foods that I know are good for me. And I really do enjoy them. Like kale
Hmm.
is definitely one of them.
Hmm.
So let's talk about those two, plasticity and learned
Yeah, I
experience.
mean, there's a lot. But really you pretty well summed it up. It's sort of what you're brought up with and then what you uh decide to value. And you can like if you just can't I've had a couple friends that just had heart attacks. So now they're in this like existential thing, not just
Yeah.
with like what might happen, but also, oh man, does that mean no more barbecue? you
Yes.
know? And so it's like all that, like we gotta go low fat, really? And it's like, but you just have to find things like you can't be overly focused on the loss of that and overly focused on the emotionality of food. You have to create your own emotionality, right? You have to be in charge of yourself and decide, yeah, I'm going to like vegetables and I'm going to find ways to cook them, put a little sesame oil on them or whatever you need to
Hmm.
do to make them really lovely. And then, you just get used to that and that's what you like. And if things are bitter, we can learn to like bitter. That's the thing we're kind of fairly hardwired for to not like, especially when we're young. And then as we grow up, we don't get less sensitive to it, but we can learn to actually not just tolerate it, but actually enjoy it, really
Enjoy
love
it.
it. Like in like a bitter beer, like an IPA,
Hmm.
people that like IPAs are not less sensitive to bitter. They're actually more sensitive to bitterness, but they have a kind of a experience seeking personality type, right? So that's just like their psychology wants that intensity.
Yeah, you mentioned people who like bitterness tend to be more adventurous.
Yeah, it's just that it's a more like thrill seeking, how whatever you want to call it, and that overall, just statistically, is a little bit more of a male characteristic than a female characteristic. And so you generally find go into a bar and look who's drinking the hazy IPAs. It's going to be more men than women. The women are going to be maybe more drinking lagers or something that's not quite so bitter. But I know plenty of women that really love
Yeah,
IPAs and stuff. So it's
I'm one
you
of the
can't
bitter.
generalize too much, but
I'm a bitter lover. I'm sure, I'm not sure. Is the reverse true? If you learn to like bitter things, are you going to become more adventurous?
That I have no idea.
Yeah,
Maybe I think
just musing.
maybe yeah. I mean, I just think pushing yourself always, try new things, have new experiences. I'm just somebody who likes to do that, you know. So I can't understand people that just have kind of a limited set of things that they will eat and drink, and anything else out of that is outside of that is kind of scary, and they don't want to go there.
You touched on this before, but I want to get into it a little bit more. And I have a section from your book I'm going to read. Fruity aromas added to a sweet beverage will enhance its sweetness even when we can't smell them. When sub-threshold amounts of a sweetener and a cherry flavoring are added to water, the water becomes noticeably sweet, despite neither additive being perceptible on its own. When sugar is added to fruit juice, it increases fruity, berry-like, and other pleasing flavors. It's like both ways.
Yeah,
Sugar increases fruitiness, and fruitiness increases sweetness.
those multimodal associations, right? Those are those things that come together between taste and odor, and you could probably throw color in there as well, because people will perceive more fruitiness of a cherry drink with color. They'll perceive if you make a cherry drink and color it green, they're going to think it's lime, even though it's actually cherry. You know,
This
so
blows
all
my
those things
mind.
are connected. Yeah,
Yeah, and you also continued talking about the saltiness of a soup is
yeah.
enhanced by adding a beefy odor. Umami actually depends on a multimodal interactions. It's bland and even unpleasant on its own, barely functioning taste at all. Paired with a rum odor, umami becomes dissonant and highly unpleasant. But with congruent meat or vegetable aromas, it blossoms into something delicious, something that doesn't happen when only salt is added.
Yes. We hate dissonance. We have a part in our brain that so first of all, we have this thing in our head called a big model of everything. And it's just like how it's our internal view of the outside world. And we often get in trouble with relying on it. And you see sometimes airplanes crash because the pilots are like tapping on the gauge, thinking the gauge is broken, but the gauge is correct and the plane's going into the ground because their model says that shouldn't be happening. They think
Mm-hmm.
we're up here, but they're really down here. And like you get in trouble with that. So the big model of everything that we have in our heads tells us what things ought to go with what things, right? And so if you get, we want to find those things, and congruent things that belong together are much more happy. They're much more, they're easier to grasp. They don't take much brain power to process, and they generally make us happy. That's why familiar flavor combinations, strawberry mango, or whatever it happens to
Mm.
be, things that we know together, like milk, like ice cream and fruit, right? Or
Peanut
like
butter and chocolate.
I mean, it's endless. I mean, that's what cooking is all about, right? Um,
Lime in the coconut. Uh-huh.
but dissonance is really unsettling, and
Mm.
it's hard to process. Your brain is like has this like congruence detector built into it, and there's two groups of cells that sort of say yes it is, no it isn't, yes it is, no it isn't, and whichever group yells the loudest, that's where you're going. But it's intensive in terms of the processing that it takes, and it's generally viewed as unpleasant. So in restaurants, especially the ones that are kind of pushing the high end, they have to be very careful to try and find where that where that line is for people. And of course, it's going to be
Mm.
different for everybody. And I mean, we find it with beers. If you give them something that's unexpected, even though we think it's delicious, if it's something that they haven't had before, or if it's something unfamiliar, they're going to view it with a lot of suspicion, and it takes people a while to kind of warm up to it sometimes. So we have to be careful about our use of specialty ingredients and combinations that we think people might view suspiciously, because it can all go off the rails pretty quick.
You mentioned color, and we have obviously some kind of color bias. You highlighted a study of oenology students at the University of Bordeaux. I'm assuming there's a great wine study there at the
One would
University of
think there
Bordeaux,
better
one would
be.
think, right?
Yeah.
And yet they described a white wine with words like citrus, lychee, straw, and lemon. And then when it was tinted, chocolate, berry, and tobacco. Did they fail these students? I mean, what is that about?
No, their brains just made the logical conclusion and went with their eyes. I mean, this is why generally in wine tastings are often, I think most typically judged blind, or they're either judged in black glasses or they're judged in red light, in which you can't really quite tell the color
Mm.
difference, because the color, and you're not really ever trying to decide what's a white wine and what's a red wine, but and they have found people can pick a red wine from a white wine blind, but they can't tell a rosé from either necessarily. So rosés are
Wow.
very confusing because they're a little bit of both.
And so that's why you named this section First Poke Your Eyes Out.
Right. It's just not that much useful information. I mean, I've seen both beer and wine people, they pick up a glass and they make the swirl and they're looking at
Sure.
it with the light. And there is, like in wine, you could tell how old a wine is by the color of the red wine or a white wine. White wines get darker or more amber. Red wines sort of go from purple to red to then brick. So you can actually like tilt the glass and see the edge of color. So you can get some clues to the age. The other thing the wine people look for are the legs. Those are the tears that come down the glass. No information there of use whatsoever. That there's not it's not about body, it's not about alcohol. It's really like that's just this thing that happens. It does, it's not much useful information.
Wow. Okay. And then you also, on the same subject of color, what we serve our food on, the color of the plate, the shape of the plate can also affect our interpretation of what we're tasting.
This completely blew my mind. This is a guy named Charles Spence, who's English. I think he's at Oxford. Has written dozens, many papers on these called so-called multimodal associations, right? And inside your head, somewhere in your thinking brain, there's a like a organizing structure that has one thing on one end and one thing on the other end. And our brains, as part of our big model of everything, we tend to put stuff in one side or the other or in the middle. And the scientists have called it booba on one end, Bouba, and kiki on the other end. And they call it a neuro-linguistic axis because they think it really has maybe started with sound. And
Hmm.
if you think about animals' alarm calls, they're always very kiki. They're always like beep beep beep, cack, 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 that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
the booba sounds are very like purring and cooing. They're very soft, gentle, like the way you talk to a baby, you know.
Right.
And,
Round.
and round. And so there's booba names. There's booba and kiki colors. Like white is a very booba color, black is a very kiki color.
Hmm.
And so that's why you put the cheesecake on a white plate. It tastes sweeter because sweet is a booba characteristic. I mean, it's just like crazy, right? But the people in the
Right.
restaurants, I mean, he did a lot of work with some very high end restaurants in Europe that were like playing with this, and but just the quality of sound. Somebody did a study on Senate candidates and how well the shape of their face matched the booba or kikiness of their names. So
Yeah.
people who had a round face named Bob tended to get like 5% more votes. And people that guys who were named Jack that also had a round face, because Jack's a very kiki name, they
Right.
did less well on all other things being equal.
Mm.
So it's like I don't know where that like it's just so strange. And if you see it, if you see it in birds, that could go back to the age of the dinosaurs. That little structure may be really, really ancient, maybe hundreds of millions of years old. We don't know exactly, but uh, so that was another mind blower for me.
Have you seen the series Drops of God?
I haven't.
You
Uh,
haven't.
I don't. Is that well? Is that's not the one where guys are training for the sommelier thing, is it?
No, it's about a winemaker who has a daughter. She lives in France, he lives in Japan. And then he has a student, his favorite student. And then the winemaker dies, and he creates a test to determine who is going to inherit all of his wealth and all of his cave of phenomenal wines. And
Wow.
the first year, the first series is fantastic. Then the second season was not so good. But I was going to ask you a question, but you can't answer it because
I haven't
the
seen it.
the daughter and this student were both experts in tasting wine,
Yeah.
and they were given all of these tests, really outlandish, to go and travel and discuss and guess what wine it was from what
Yeah.
vineyard and what year. And there were some things that they did, and I just wondered, is this really possible?
People have amazing skill and really like we have one memory system that's really mainly for just the sensations. And that's the one it's really highly connected to the place memories and things. Those are the things that come flooding in, like the famous Marcel Proust bite of a biscuit and tea. And like his whole childhood came flooding back with just one little taste. And that's a
Hmm.
sensory memory, but we also have a cognitive memory. It's a completely separate system that lives in our brain, our cognitive brains upstairs. And it's like this giant stack of index cards. And we could put anything we want on the index cards. So for wine people, it's the grape type, it's the region, it's the which side of the river, which side of the hill, what little parcel, what year, what weather. They have it very. They can do that because they have enough tasting experience, so that they can just keep making new cards with more and more and more and more detail. And but it's all cognitive, which means it's all learned stuff. They're not born knowing how to do that. It takes a lot of effort. It's a very difficult process, obviously.
They may not be born with it, but some people are born with a greater, more sensitive ability in smell and taste.
No,
No, they're not.
not really. No, there's
Even a
no
super tasters.
the word is not the best word. So it's super taste. So there is a term called super taster. That is people who have we have there's a certain bitter receptor that we have two copies of, and it comes in two variations. One is the sensitive one, one is not sensitive one. So super tasters have two sensitive copies. Some people have two insensitive copies. They call them non-tasters. And then most of like half the population about has one of each, and they're called normal tasters. But they're not. But it's only for bitterness and only for some kinds of bitter. It's a type of bitter you'd find in like caffeine is like that receptor is pretty broadly focused. So caffeine, vegetable like broccoli bitterness, kale bitterness, that kind of stuff. But it's really about that, and they're also a little bit more sensitive to irritating mouthfeel. So generally, the super tasters are a little more sensitive to just the taste and tech, like the heat of alcohol. Like my sister's a super taster, I think. We've never measured it, but she can't like one drop of alcohol on her tongue. She's like, ah. So she's never
Hmm.
drank at all because it's just super, it's too much. It's just too irritating to her. And
Hmm.
so, but that's not really like that useful culinarily, right? It's not a particular benefit. The people that have two insensitive copies generally are not in the wine and beer and culinary industries. But everybody else, that's 75% of the population, more or less, that's where everybody is. But but then that has nothing to do with smell. And smell, like sensitivity to smell, varies by chemical. So there are some blindnesses for sure. It's the same type of thing with multiple copies of receptors, some of which are maybe higher functioning and some are lower functioning. But there are certain chemicals that you might find in a beer off flavor tasting or something like that, that maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 people are kind of really blind to. Uh, but generally, there's no mechanism to increase your overall smell sensitivity. So people that have really good sense of smell, they are better at paying attention. I know
Hmm.
when I talked to people that were running sensory programs at breweries, one of them said, "We hire people that literally smell the roses. Like we're looking for people that smell is part of their life already. They pay attention to it. They smell their food. They could describe their food. They drive around. They could pick their toothpaste out of a lineup. They just focus on it. And that's go ahead. Sorry.
We just have like a couple of minutes left, and
Yeah.
I wanted to just wrap it up in terms of how do we use all this information in our daily lives, just our normal people,
Hmm.
in terms of what we do with our food and drink and paying attention and taking advantage of all that we have.
Yes, I think that's just really one of those great lessons about life, right? It's very short. And like you can't say I'll do it later. You got to do it now. You got to it's like every bite counts, every smell counts. It's a joy to be alive when things are good and that's not going to go on forever and sooner or later we all come to the end of our road and it's like we enjoy our friends, we enjoy our food. It's just one more aspect of living life well and paying attention to the things around us and learning, ideally for people who are interested in it, learning how to create flavors as well and cook and or make beer or make wine or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I think it's all about being mindful. And we could also use
Yep.
some more language when it comes to tasting. And I
Yeah,
think,
language is really hard. We're not set up for that. Like
yeah, but maybe we'll develop more descriptive words for the things we're tasting.
you can learn it. You can learn them. I mean, wine has their own lexicon. Beer has a specific vocabulary that people use with beer. It's part of training. Is you come to it where you can. Jancis Robinson, the wine writer, says if a wine reminds you of fresh tennis balls, then just go with that
Right.
for your own. Like when I smell fresh tennis balls, oh, that's that wine. But then you have to learn what other people call it. So it's the
Mm.
two-step process of like kind of learning first to recognize and then to connect it with like so you could talk it to other people who are doing the same thing.
Well, Randy, thank you very much for taking your time to speak with me today. I really have great respect for the work that you've done creating this book, Your Tasting Brain, A Sensory Approach to Wine, Beer, and Other Pleasures. It was a joy to read, and that joy has to be framed, but I think we have to invest in order to get things out of what we want to learn. You have to put time in. And so that's how I'm looking at this book. It was an investment, and I got a
Yeah.
lot out of it. So thank you for writing it.
Well, thanks for saying so. I appreciate it. Thanks for having
Yeah.
me on. It was a great
Okay.
conversation.
Thank you. Take care. And
Sure.
everybody, have a delicious week. Bye.
Bye.